Welcome to the DevReady podcast, where we're helping non-techs build better tech. Today, we're fortunate enough to be joined by Stuart Thornton. Stuart, we met, he was a bit of advice in a startup that we're involved with over in, it was in Thailand, actually, in an offsite. So, that was late last year, but really got to know Stuart, had a good conversation with him, learned a bit about his journey and his background. Stuart was a co-founder at hoolah, which is a buy now, pay later ecosystem that Asia's leading in that space. They exited in 2021 to shop back and had a good success from exiting the business, and that was only a 3 to 4 year journey, which is quite a quick in and out sort of process, Stuart. And then seen as a tech advisor in the space and as a business tech advisory, helping out different startups in the space. And Stuart probably hasn't taken much time off, has gone straight into Heroes, which is a new venture. And I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about today around fascinating around, I think Web 3.0 sort of space, how fans may be able to sort of engage more with athletes and even benefit from how athletes go from maybe early stage right through to the topper end of their career. Stuart, thank you for joining us and welcome to the DevReady podcast.
Absolute pleasure. It's good to be here. Thank you very much for the invite as well.
You're welcome.
Not a problem. Happy to see you again.
Yes. Slightly different surroundings than Thailand.
Correct.
Yeah, a little bit cooler.
Maybe for us. I don't know about Stuart.
It's still quite warm here, unfortunately.
Yes. So tell us a bit about your background. Obviously, you haven't been involved in your own businesses in the past. You've had a bit of an extensive corporate career. Tell us a bit about your background and what sort of led to jumping into something like a hoolah to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. So from the UK originally, you can probably tell that. Worked predominantly at the very beginning in the telecom space, which was, I guess, sort of still technology. At least it was back then. Incredible experience, actually, really, when telecoms was starting to grow and create value rather than just be sort of pipes in the ground, so to speak. Especially at the onset of the internet boom at the end of the 90s, beginning of 2000, which is really when I sort of started my career. Which these sort of bright lights of technology and all the great things that were happening, sort of certainly was attractive to me. And then just basically built a career, in that industry, working throughout Europe, and then was very fortunate to get the opportunity to travel to Australia. I had a rucksack on my back for a few months, and that turned into a permanent, opportunity to stay there, much to my sort of family's distaste, being on the other sort of side of the world. But I've always had that sort of
far away, isn't it, from the UK?
Exactly, yeah.
Definitely.
I've always had a bit of that adventurer, sort of spirit, perhaps, and that's, I think, what sort of took me down there, and settled for a bit, and that adventurer spirit then sort of kicked back in a few years later, which took me to sort of Singapore, mostly with work, to do that, and again in sort of telecom space. I was very fortunate to have an opportunity to then move into payments, which sounded quite boring at the time, but all of a sudden it became fintech, and that was another sort of growth. Technology space, again, right at the sort of forefront of a lot of that, which was incredibly exciting. And then, as you sort of alluded to, my first step into sort of startup world, and which was an incredible experience, which I'm sort of sure we can talk about. And I think it's, to answer very, very briefly, the question around what took me into there, I think it was something that I always wanted to do. And it was really just trying to find the first scalable opportunity that perhaps was worth the sacrifice, because it is a massive sacrifice to go do anything like that. And that was where it took me. And of course, the subject which you introduced at the beginning around what we were doing was sort of buy now, pay later. Again, it was another one of those big growth curve opportunities around with companies perhaps like Klarna in Europe, and Afterpay down in Australia, really, hitting the sort of some home runs and really creating significant outcomes for merchants and consumers alike. It was really looking at Asia and sort of seeing this amazing part of the world with so many people and so many social shifts and changes, that really it was really the realization this is a great opportunity to go and take advantage of, really, and build something amazing. And that's really where it all sort of started.
With saying that I was the first one that was worth taking the risk, I'm sure there was other ones that had come to the forefront before that. What sort of was like your criteria to say, yep, okay, this is the one that I'm judging and it's going to be scalable?
That's a really good question. I have a folder on my computer with all these terrible ideas, or at least some of them were terrible, or at least ideas perhaps that other people had already taken advantage of. And it was in a multitude of different areas. It really around, I think, sort of seeing a problem that could be solved, and really that's the sort of the core of sales. It's the cornerstone of startup. You have to go and have something that's worth solving, and then the next step to that is the problem big enough? Is it really a problem, or is it just a kind of a nice to have that you could feature based perhaps a new solution, or as opposed to actually building a business around it? And then really the next step around that was that how sizable could it get? If you're really going to sacrifice something, there's ultimately something that you want to get some sort of return. And some of them were, I think, this is quite sad to admit this, but it was like an app for filling up petrol, for example, finding the cheapest, best place. But in reality, how much of a problem is it solving, and how scalable is it that you could actually create that? There are a couple of companies, I think, that have done that. So
there are, yes, there's a few apps in Oz, I believe, but how monetizable is it?
Yeah.
Yes.
And it was actually driven from a colleague that sort of, I remember him saying, oh yeah, no one's going to pay for petrol, using an app or something like that. And it was that sort of moment going, well, maybe they actually could do, maybe there is something there. But I think the sort of final point really was, how much do I know about that space? How passionate am I about that? The sort of the industry or the vertical that you'd be going into. And I think it's those three things that really determined, really whether it was worth doing it. And of course, buy now, pay later, it was payments. I knew about payments. It was Asia. It was a huge market. And, I think all of those sort of things really, led me to go and sort of kick that off and say, right, I could do this. Actually, it wasn't I could do this. It was actually culminated in a group of people doing it, because I realized that I wasn't the one that could actually do it by myself. It was really a combination of a whole, group of amazing people to do that.
Yeah, it's rarely one person can start it, but it takes a team.
Exactly.
I think passion's important, right? So there's obviously going to be challenges along the journey, no matter what the opportunity is. Looks like, feels like you need to be willing to sacrifice. And that's one of the key words that you said, and have upside. I think a lot of people might jump into a startup and a business just because they want to go and work for themselves. I see this quite often. But realistically, they're just looking at an opportunity to go out on their own and not really considering what the upside might look like, what the opportunity really is, and how big it could be. So I think it's a good takeaway for people to think about if they're going down this path. And I like the fact that you've got a folder of ideas held off, really, because, I think Anthony's been one of those too. Plenty of ideas over there.
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know how many random calls you've got. I've got an idea.
Yes.
There's another hour and a half conversation.
But it's those crazy conversations that actually sometimes leads to something. And I think, again, it's sort of alluding to the team thing. Someone's got to have the idea, and then it actually takes a couple of people to thrash that out. And everybody's a bit different. Problems. You're problem solvers, problem creators, problem. What's the word? Sort of people that create those ideas. So I think it's that's what makes it, beautiful experience as well.
From that team perspective, what was your steps? How did you go about getting the right people around you? Coming from realities and non-technical background, right? So kind of build it yourself, have the concept, probably that business acumen, more sales, BD driven.
Definitely.
Yeah, so understood the market, maybe can easily have a conversation with a customer or potential customer. What would it look like to start establishing a team? Sure.
Yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head, really. I mean, I'm definitely, and if there was more than me sitting here at the moment, there'd be a lot of laughs and giggles at the moment around the ability that I have, or lack of, with technology itself. So it was really important to go and, build that around. But, my career has always been around sort of the commercial aspects. But it was interesting, when you sort of start to think strategically around what you're trying to achieve. You're thinking about the problem, and then you start to break it down into, okay, we need to go and do this, or we need to go and do that. And then you need to go, okay, I'm not good at this. This is not my forte by any stretch of the imagination. What's the kind of person that I need? And so this is not necessarily a specific path, but it kind of unfolded in this way that you'd go, right, let me go and ask a few people. Do you know this? Do you know someone that knows this? What's the kind of person I need? And ultimately, it was that sort of process that started to create, some value. And sometimes you find someone and, they're great for a sort of certain period of time, and then actually someone else comes along and they're a good fit as well. And it really is around a realization that you need to have those best fit people at particular times on that sort of journey. And we were very fortunate. Again, it's the more, one of the things I like doing is very much around, sort of the networking. You share. The more you share, the more doors you open, the more conversations you have, the more people you're connected to. And then you start to connect through a mutual mission or vision, perhaps, of what you want to achieve. And all of a sudden, other doors open. And that's when I think you sometimes hopefully get the right people to come and join you on that journey. Because it's not necessarily, there are a whole multitude of different elements that come into play when bringing people together. It's not just, do you want to do a startup? It's, do you want to do this startup? And are you passionate about what we're trying to create? Are you at a stage in your life where you have the capacity to do, something like this, which is a massive determinant when actually sort of putting something like this together, because not everybody's in that sort of space. Not just in terms of life stage, but also, do they have the right mindset around actually building? As you sort of alluded to earlier, a lot of people want to build their own business, for example. It's because it kind of sounds sexy. I want to have my own, control of my own destiny, which are all fantastic things, and I completely agree with those. But not everybody's actually the right fit for that. There are some people that just think that it's good, but actually, when push comes to shove, this is not really for them at all.
It can get a little bit hard in any business.
It is.
And I think, but I feel like some people give up a little bit too quickly too. That's what I've noticed. Like some people that have a concept and an interesting idea, and as soon as I won't name the name, but some really good concept, really good idea, really good people, and then one of the co-founders was probably in a position where that stage in life didn't work for them, and the other co-founder didn't do that work up front, and that sort of threw them, and then all of a sudden collapses.
Stopped.
Yeah. I think that's really important to know who you're getting into business with, because conceptually, good concept, they got accepted into some really good accelerators, but it just sort of fell away as soon as that sort of that pin got pulled.
It's interesting you say that. We spent a bit of time at the beginning trying to make sure, this is a bit of the corporate experience coming into play as well, just trying to make sure that we were aligned in terms of what we wanted to achieve. This is sort of methodology, I forget who wrote it now, but the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And we use that as a sort of a methodology and a format to bring everybody together really in terms of what we wanted to achieve. It wasn't a sort of a perfect path in that, but at least it gave us, even sort of 3 or 4 or 5 years later, we were still referencing that session because we had an understanding of each other and, what was important to us and how we worked, in sort of building a team. So that was, quite a fortuitous, outcome. One of the other things perhaps to sort of share as well is that, this time around, I've sort of broadened the team a little bit in terms of the people involved, within. Again, driven by the sort of vision and mission, I think, of what we want to achieve. But by virtue of that, you lessen the impact of people inevitably dropping out of the process. And so you don't have that problem around where you've put too many eggs in one basket. You've always got like a plan B, so to speak. And I think that's quite important too. And that's a bit of a learning perhaps for this time.
Going back to hoolah team, we've got some people around us. We have good vision, good insight into really early days, rather than just getting some people that may want to be involved in something, going a bit more strategic and thinking about that and going through I think you mentioned that 5 dysfunctions of a team, putting some structure and thought behind who you bring on. I think it's quite important because, you can just suck anyone in at early days and they might be the completely wrong fit if it's not done in a bit of a regimented manner. So really good insight there. When you went through the process, this was a team, and then how did you go about from a business sales perspective? What did you do? Did you sell a product before you had it? Did you build something, or was it really conceptual? What was your strategy there?
God, I'd like to say that was a structured approach, but I'd be lying.
Love it.
I mean, there was a structure to it. Like we had, I remember one of the first things we did, we spent quite a long time because we were all in sort of, sort of somewhat game for employment, but it was really putting a business plan together. I certainly haven't done this the same way this time, but the business plan was like a 90-page document outlining everything that we wanted to do. And to be honest, it was crazy doing it, but it did actually help to consolidate the thinking around, the sort of future direction and the path and the model and all the other bits and pieces. And so actually, that was probably the right start at that point, although we ended up, sort of one of those classic, sort of sits in the bottom drawer in your desk kind of thing, or at least the digital version of that. But it did sort of consolidate the thoughts. And really from there, it was, okay, we now know what we think we need to build and what's the best path based on some of the deeper problems that we'd sort of learned. So for example, data for consumers is, almost completely missing across the Asia marketplace, in comparison with Europe, where you have a lot more tangible data that you can easily access around, sort of risk, for example. In Australia, actually, it's a very sort of similar situation where it's very difficult to get access, like to a sort of a credit bureau, for example. There's no specific consumer data that you have access to. So trying to build a technology stack around that was going to be important. So there you start to sort of narrow down the kind of things that you ultimately need to try and get your head around. And from there, it was really then, putting together, an MVP version of what we wanted. So that was sort of more on the technology side. And then we also needed to then sort of prove, what we were going to build was going to be of interest to people. And so we got somewhat fortuitously our first merchant, for example, that was willing to, but they literally gave us the keys to their website. It was a small company, but by doing that, it gave us the ability to play with that. And then ultimately sort of build the MVP, which we used, some partners to do that at the sort of early stage, which gave us sort of something that we could take to market for an MVP launch. And that was really where we started to get some subtraction, and with traction ultimately gave us the ability to go and talk to more merchants. The merchant engagement model was interesting in that you typically fell into 3 buckets, and you see this always. One, you've got the early adopters that go, yeah, absolutely. Into that, technology is the way forward. Let me join you whenever you're ready. To the ones that would say, well, let me see what it's like first, when you're live, and then, then I'll come on board. And then you've got the 3, no, it's, way too early, don't believe in it. But ultimately, that, or at least now we know that was always going to be the case. And as you start to build momentum, you get data points, proof points, technically part of the sales engagement of, the feature benefit proof. You then go back to those guys and they start sort of actually coming, in line and joining the platform.
Yeah, with a bit more data and backing, right? So
correct.
I love the fact that you got access to a website and actually built. How did you manage that, Stu? Because that must have been a nice little conversation. Were you just really early adopted, happy to give it a go? Was it a relationship?
A mate of mine had a sort of tennis platform, did sort of lessons and tennis equipment, and it was a small sort of platform, but he was just sort of super keen because he sort of saw the value of it, and he was a friend, and I played a bit of tennis, which will probably lead us to the next, the next conversation as well. And that was where it sort of took us. And he was very fortuitous to have him on board. Of course, we helped him out a little bit on that front as well. And but it worked. That was the best thing. We actually had I remember sort of the first day that we launched the MVP. There's a rather sort of amusing anecdotal story where he called me up on a Sunday afternoon. I think we'd gone live on the Saturday, and we were actually at one of the guy's house doing some work in the afternoon, and the guy rang me up and said, "Oh, are you doing some testing?" I said, "Well, I'm certainly not doing testing because I'm not allowed anywhere near it." But
right away.
Exactly. I chatted to the other guys. They said, "No, we're not doing any testing." And I went, "Oh, crikey! We've actually got the transaction. Our very first transaction. It actually did what it said.
That's exactly what you wanted to hear.
Which is what we wanted to hear, and that really helped us to sort of get on that journey to then sort of proving to investors that it was worthwhile. And of course, you've got some good reference points and proof points around companies like Afterpay, and that was really the start of the journey.
I think it's a good learning for people to think about is who might they work with early days, because generally it's our network, it's our people we're associated with. There's a trust factor there, right? When you think about it, it's much easier with the trust factor. That sort of, yes, I trust Stuart, I've known Stuart before, I'm happy to give it a go. Yes, this makes some sense, let's try it. So it can be very hard when you go outside the network. Well, the steps about just building some traction and some case studies as how you started to venture outside the network.
Absolutely. I mean, I think in reality, the value proposition sold itself anyway. And that was one of the reasons why we did it in the first place. Like when I was working in the sort of payment space, merchants would come along and go, "Listen, we need something to help us to increase conversion and sales." And this was a solution that ultimately did that. So the gap was probably more so just the proof points. And the more proof points we got, obviously we used some of the success of the model to start with, and we were lucky because we had that at least outside of the Asia region. But the more that we got our own then off the back of that from those early adopters, the more that we were able to actually sort of go outside of that network and sell it as a proper solution. And it, as I said, it somewhat sold itself. It was really coming down to the scale and size and that sort of trust element. There was and some other bigger companies, when you start getting into those, the enterprise sale gets longer, harder. There's more people to engage. There's more trust to build. When you're a tiny little startup, it's going to be very hard to do that. But ultimately, over time, we got those accounts on board, and it was just a matter of time rather than a matter of if.
Is those enterprise customers like that B2B cycle, is that something that you're sort of expecting to take that long? We've experienced part of it, but I know, like a lot of startups might not realize how long that cycle actually takes to complete.
Yeah. I think, I have an experience of, small sales to massive global enterprise sales. So I have a good appreciation of the different sales cycles and what it takes and how to go and do that. And I think that was really helpful in understanding and structuring the sort of sales strategy, the value proposition, the management of understanding when revenue would sort of hit the business, the criticality of having a CRM, for example, and other sort of such systems to help you through that process. And that was one of the first things we actually invested in, was really a really good CRM system that would help us to create the foundations in the future of managing the business, but also for data. So I think that was something that we could the experience brought to the table around that. So we knew that was probably going to be the case as we went through. The irony is that what I think we probably realized, especially in the sort of retail space, which of course we were operating in, the speed of which we were able to sign up some of the smaller and medium-sized companies was much quicker than I thought. And that was really impressive. I mean, within the first, I think it's sort of 12, 18 months, we'd already done sort of 1,000 merchants or something like that. And, of course,
that's considerable.
It was quite significant.
Number.
I think the quickest, and this is really going back to the memories now, but the memory bank, but I think the quickest sale was about 10 minutes. We literally, we sold them, signed the contract, on the phone, and because we'd automated as much as we could, to do that, and it was a Shopify account. You press a button, it's live. That was almost as quickly. That was probably the quickest one I think that we were able to achieve.
making that seamless integration. So having the Shopify plugin that they can just get off the store and
Absolutely.
sign in makes it easy.
Massive. One of the first things we did again as well was getting realizing that sort of partner engagement, the integration partner engagement was absolutely critical for us to going and making this work. So I remember having late night calls to Canada to try and prove them that we were a really valuable potential partner for them, because all of it was done out of Canada at the time. That was pretty cool.
10 minutes. That's some sort of record. Turn it on and off you go.
Yeah.
So in that business for 3-4 years, give or take, eventually exited. Was that the plan, or did it sort of just happen that way?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was the plan, ultimately, of what we wanted to achieve. Although you don't ever really, I think, truly think around what the future's going to look like. It was so embedded in the today. You have a view of the future, but you never know what that outcome is going to look like. I mean, there's a stereotypical startup journey, for example, that everybody reads about, but you don't really know what that's going to look like. Are we going to be a massive, global business and et cetera, or are we going to get bored, or what are we going to do? You have ideas and thoughts, but it's never sort of certain really till you get to that point. And so the timing, I think, ironically, was probably good for the business for a couple of reasons. One, I think the market started to shift a little bit, at least the sentiment to the space. I still absolutely believe in it. I think the technology is great. I think how it gets perceived there's a challenge around that, which
there's a bit of a stigma in the buy now, pay later space,
which I understand, but unfortunately, it's probably there are players that perhaps have not played by the rules that have sort of taken us there. And then really, I think it was also a realization that because we'd grown quickly, to really continue that sort of growth path, I think we realized that we needed a partner or partners to try and help us get there, because we had a big jump that we needed to try and take, and doing that by ourselves was going to take capital and some time, especially when we started to see some other companies, competition coming in, which is always a positive thing in my opinion, but with deeper pockets. And that was really, I think, where we sort of, I think we had a thought that this is probably maybe this is sort of a consideration for us at this stage, especially if we wanted to continue to try and drive our margin contribution to the business as well, which was sort of a key consideration.
It's always an interesting one when the right time is, but no one really knows. But I think, it seems like it worked out not too bad for you guys in terms of the exit 2021, give or take. How many customers did you have at the time of exit? Any merchants using hoolah at that time?
Oh God, that's a good question. I think it was over 3,000-4,000, something like that in totality. We were in Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, about to go live in Thailand, and we had a lot of the foundations in place for the Philippines, which we never quite delivered that. But it was a pretty exciting journey on that.
Sizable business in terms of I don't know if you can talk about that sort of transactions per month, per annum. Well, how big was this business?
I mean, I think that's probably something we still need to sort of keep under the wraps. But
that's fine. Yeah.
It was a pretty significant sort of size, I think, at the time. When you look at the scale of obviously the merchants, the consumers, the number of markets we were in, we were growing easily 30 to 40% month on month. So you can get
wow.
You can get a rough idea of what that was, what that might be.
Brilliant. And to be involved in such a high scaling, growing startup, what did that feel like daily? Because not
stressful,
many people
tiring,
get there,
yes.
Was it just a race to keep up?
Yeah. I think for me personally, I try and put this in the right words. I've always had quite a good work ethic. I'm either on or off, and so
yes.
when that's the case, I will go all out and I will work until I have nothing else to do. That's never the case because you've always got something to do. But And so I think with that sort of environment, it was actually probably an environment I quite enjoyed because of that speed and the work ethic almost drove me anyway. You know, that I'm the kind of person, one, that gets bored very quickly, and two, that if I'm not busy, I'm not productive. There's something wrong. You know, someone's not calling or emailing, it's because I'm not doing something. And so, you know, from my perspective, that was always a big driver for me.
Brilliant.
So the whole experience was one of I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was incredibly stressful at times. It was hard work. It was tiring. It was, you know, there was a whole lot of negative aspects. But the interesting thing, I think, when you do something like this is that, especially if you're a sort of a startup person, you kind of put all of that in a tiny little bucket, and it hides at the back of your head, and you forget it. And it's like a fish in a goldfish bowl. You just keep swimming around and forget about it. And which I think is an important skill in a mentality in startups anyway. But that was sort of my sort of lasting impression, perhaps, of the experience. It was great. I mean, I really thoroughly enjoyed it. It was one of the best things I've ever done. Very proud.
Yeah, you would be proud of how that came together in the team. And how big did the team get to in the end? Is it small team, high scale, or did the team grow with it?
We had about 130, 40 people, I think, to at the sort of high point, which was sort of pretty significant number of people, I think.
Yeah, it adds to that stress level, right? So a lot to manage. Yes.
It's really funny. I mean, a lot of people talk about this. You get to that point of how to put this, the stress wasn't necessarily... Some people talk about stress of knowing that you're responsible for these people. And yes, there is an element to that. The bit that I stressed perhaps more so was that I really enjoyed and wanted that connection to as many people as possible. I hated the fact that I didn't know someone, for example, because I felt I was letting people down, not just those people, but also perhaps managers and people like that. So I really made an effort to make sure, it sounds so cliche, but accessible to as many people as possible. You know, I never believed in hierarchy or ego or anything like that at all. We were all, whilst we might have a hierarchy structure, because that was important, as far as I was concerned, it was as flat as the piece of paper it was drawn on. You know, it should never stop people talking.
It's important to get to know your team, but when you get to 120, 130, it's
a bit harder.
Almost, it's almost impossible, right? So if you're speaking to one person a day, that's almost half a year before you get around. So it becomes a bit of a balancing act. Great effort. Awesome to understand a bit more about the insights into that. It's probably quite a bit of learning for people that are looking and on that scale sort of journey. Now, you're clearly a guy that doesn't like to sit around and do nothing. So exited that business for about a year, 2021, and then you went 10 months, 12 months later, you started Heroes.
I know.
So yes, like to be stupid. So when we met, I think it was called OnlyFans or Fans Only, or what was it called?
It definitely wasn't called OnlyFans.
No, My Fans.
I'd have a lot of problems with that one.
Yeah,
it was called,
so wrong one, but it was called.
The working title was Our Fans.
Our Fans, yes. I don't know why I went there, but yes, that was in the back of my mind because there was a clash.
That was one of the reasons why it's no longer called that as well.
Yes, probably the reason, right? So that's when we met, and then you were looking to change the name. It's ended up at Heroes. Which I quite like. I think you've done well. There's sort of a good landing there. Give us a bit of a quick dive into that in terms of what you're trying to achieve, where it sort of came from, and where you're at.
Yeah, so I alluded to tennis playing. I was not necessarily the subject of matter of the pain point as much as I would have loved to have that to been the case. I was never quite good enough to go anywhere near, sort of making it in a career out of it. But I knew people that did, and ultimately there was one guy that I reconnected with, and it was quite a sad story, really, that he'd been let down somewhat by the system, by sort of government sports sponsorship, sponsorship from external parties, and he came from, perhaps a slightly less privileged background, and ultimately seeing him 30 years having to make ends meet was quite a sad story. And it sort of planted a seed that when I started to look around, I could see that 30 years later, despite the fact that sport is a $1.3 trillion industry with all the different components within it, that hasn't changed an iota. You've still got people, sort of selling houses and, family members to try and, get to sports tournaments and events, and it's just not good enough in this sort of day and age. And ultimately, I saw again a problem to be solved. It was a significant size market. You're looking at a $1.3 trillion industry with, arguably 100 million athletes at different stages of their career trying to make or have the intention of making a career out of sports. You've got 8,000 sports around the world. You've got 4.5 billion sports fans. To me, that's a significant size market to go and, solve a problem. And then I think the interesting thing, the realization was that obviously athletes have a very unique position in society, and you'll excuse the sort of pun, but they are our real life heroes. They really do represent and are the epitome of human potential. We put these people on pedestals because of what they're able to achieve that we can't. And I think that realization around the value that they hold and the disconnect between that value and their ability to earn money, to ultimately reach the potential, but also maximize the potential, because, you have obviously a whole lot of people that are on that path that struggle, but you also have people like, Ronaldo. I know this sounds silly to go and bring him up perhaps in the same conversation, but Ronaldo, went to Saudi Arabia to play football. He didn't do it for the football. He went there for the $170 million or whatever it was that he's paid. And the irony of that situation is that 170 million is a drop in the ocean in comparison to what other people would have earned from him. And so the reality is that it doesn't matter where you sit on the spectrum of athlete, there is a potential to go and maximize, that potential from an earning perspective and a consistent earning perspective. So we looked at a few different options around how to sort of solve this, whether it was, more the crowdfunding altruism to the sort of investment and return. But what we settled on really was a model that connects those fans, to their athletes, but ultimately brings together the best of that human behavior that I sort of alluded to, but data and technology ultimately to go and sort of solve this. And so the Heroes platform and the sort of sales pitch line is, we're a membership club platform that connects athletes to fans, or enables athletes and fans to connect, inspire, and invest in each other. So that's really the sort of crux of what we're doing. And the inspiration is this $4 billion business over in the States called Patreon, which is effectively something very similar, but even in the the creator industry, whether you're
in
sort
the
of
creative space,
sort of a musician or an artist or a poet or something like that. We're really focusing and honing in on the sports vertical because of that value of the fandom, the emotion, the behavior that basically exists, and really taking the concept of earning, engagement, and rewards, which are the three sort of fundamental pillars, to a whole different sort of level by really focusing in at that sort of specific detail level of sport. So, for example, engagement in sport is I want to know what they're doing. I want to get closer. I want to be able to meet my hero, for example. Or in the reward sense, it could be things like collectibles, which may be worth money, or even getting access to some of the sponsorship money perhaps that they earn. And because I've helped them get to that point where they can earn it, I want a bit of a return. And that's basically what we're building, but in a real, very simple sort of structure and model, using subscription payments, for example, but using a little bit of cool technology to basically facilitate some of the engagement and rewards. You sort of alluded to the Web3, for example. We're using that technology, but we're not using the terminology. And I think that's a really critical, point.
You can lose people. I think people that understand the space, especially the tech, can come along the journey, but the general public may get a little bit lost in it.
Correct.
It needs to be abstracted. As soon as you start throwing around crypto or NFTs, you're just going to get them thinking, what sort of a quick money-making scam is this?
100%. And it doesn't matter. It's almost, do you remember the old timeshare stuff? And they'd stick some
Yep.
fancy name against it. It's actually to me it's the same sort of thing. So you really need to be very careful, I think, around how the vernacular and terminology you use with the fans. And you also need to be careful. And I think this is a really, really important point, something I've learned. Technology is amazing, but you need to use it to actually solve something. You don't sell your business.
Some value.
Right. You don't sell your business as a technology company. And this actually, we sort of alluded to, when I was sort of, having my growing up stage in my first career, with the internet boom. Of course, you had all these internet companies, they were all growing and it was all about the internet. Nowadays, you don't see internet companies, you just see companies, delivering something. And I think we're going through that same cycle where with the sort of boom and the speculative boom, and then there's a little bit of bust. And now I think it's time to start using this technology to actually solve some problems. So for us, it's around distribution, it's around proof of ownership, it's around, putting a value against, potential something that's worth something that can easily be traded or consumed digitally, across the world, not having to sort of have an issue of time zone or currency or anything sort of, associated with that. And I think that's where Web3 can have a massive impact.
Exciting, Stuart. When does it launch? Because I think you mentioned it's pretty intimate.
Yeah, I'm just looking at my date and time. We're the 21st. So we have our sort of version 2 alpha launch tonight, where our developer guys will present back what they've had to sort of fix from the first and go through that. And then the beta launch, Touchwood, will start this Thursday.
Brilliant. So if anyone wants to find out more about Heroes, where do they look?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can heros.xyz is the website. It's sort of quite simple. The website as of today is the old one, so don't get too excited with that one. Well, you won't do because it's not possible.
When this comes out, I'm sure it might be a little bit more spruced up by then.
Thursday, the website will be a bit more spruced up with a bit slightly different sort of branding and what have you. But we're excited about bringing all that together and making that sort of come alive. So very exciting.
It's always an exciting time when something launches, or at least at a beta stage, just getting it out to market, getting that initial feedback.
Exactly.
And iterating and evolving product. That's where it all starts, and the journey really begins.
Absolutely. I was sort of laughing the other day with the guys in the team. I said I met a friend of mine, and his son apparently loves basketball. One of the first guys we've got is this really cool basketballer from the Philippines, arguably the top player in the Philippines league, and he sort of said, "Oh, well, I'll definitely go and subscribe." So at least we know we've got one paying customer. So I'm not sure that's going to lead to our next funding round, but at least we've got someone to come onto the platform.
Classic, Stuart.
Oh, it's a good start.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for joining us on the DevReady podcast. I think maybe let's do another reset at 2, 3, 6 months when things settle down on the Heroes. Sure. I'd love to hear more about how that's tracking, and really appreciate you coming on and sharing.
No, absolute pleasure. It's lovely to chat with you.
And your background, Stuart. Appreciate it, mate. So
thank you for the invite. It's lovely to chat to you. Very
thanks for having us.
Great sort of podcast. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you.